to make sure it will pass.
The débat, the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I am pleased to rise and have the occasion to address this motion. I've always taken an interest and do today in parliamentary procedure. And I think whenever we're talking about the rules of debate, members rightly have an interest in what exactly is going on and what those details are. And there is a legitimate tension. It's why these kinds of debates tend to happen frequently in parliaments between a government that needs to get its business done, not just for its own sake, but presumably for the sake of the nation and the people who elected them, and an opposition who has a job to do in terms of scrutinizing the government's work, trying to make it better where they can, and oppose it when they can. And I've often said that I think there are reasons for supporting the rights of the opposition within Parliament that have to do with the rights of parliamentarians, but there are also reasons for supporting the rights of the opposition within Parliament that have to do with the time it takes for word to get out about what government intends to do, and to have a civil society response, and to organize around initiatives by the government that they may not like. And I think that's one of our responsibilities as parliamentarians always, is to look at the need for things to get done in the nation's capital, in Parliament and in government, as well as the obligations that we have to foster a healthy culture of opposition. And so these are certainly the issues that are at stake. I think sometimes in this place it's hard to get at the particular circumstances because we often tend to address these issues with a hyperbolic tone. Sometimes that's warranted, and I've seen occasions in this House where I felt that it was warranted and have participated in that spirit. I think that's especially true when you have majority governments that aren't forced to negotiate with other parties in Parliament in order to advance their agenda. And so when you see members of all the same party getting up and dictating the rules of debate and there's been no meaningful interplay between parties in the House, that's one thing. I do think it's another thing when the government has to negotiate with another party in order to get its business done. And what we're seeing is a government that has undertaken a number of initiatives in order to get support from the NDP to move a budget forward, for instance. And that's okay. That's actually how this place is supposed to work. And I think it's how it works when it's working at its best. So then the question is, in order to be able to get some of those things done, how do you conduct the business of the chamber? I want to use C8 as an example of a case of opposition that does bleed into obstructionism. And I'm both trying to speak and also listen to the conversation that's happening at the same time.
Oui, alors, je vais rappeler
I'd like to remind the members that if they'd like to have conversations, they might consider going to the antechamber to do so while someone else has the floor.
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So when you look at Bill C8, what I will say is that despite C8 being disappointing in some regards, and I'm on the record in terms of the ways in which I think C8 is disappointing. I think, for instance, there's a foreign home buyers tax. It's got a lot of loopholes. I think you can say it's a step in the right direction, but it's certainly not going to solve the housing crisis that we see in Canada. I think, we actually need to take some action on domestic investors that are helping pump up prices in the housing market. And unless we do that, a lot of the other things that government has been contemplating simply are not going to be effective. So I certainly have my criticisms of the bill. Happy to talk about those, have talked about those in other places. What I would say is that we haven't seen like a burgeoning kind of civil movement against Bill C8. I don't think anyone's particularly animated about it outside this place. But you wouldn't know that by looking at the proportion of time that this place has spent on that bill. So we've got people calling for real climate action that are really upset at a government that has not done enough and isn't doing enough and isn't even planning to do enough in order to fight the climate crisis. We're hearing from people about health funding and the state of healthcare in Canada, the need for more money to be transferred from the federal government to the provinces for health funding. but also the absurdly high cost of prescription drugs and the ways in which a national pharmacare plan could help with that. We've heard from people who have never in their family been able to access dental services, who want to be able to access dental services and are excited at the prospect of finally having a mechanism to be able to go to the dentist and have that visit paid for. These are the issues that we're hearing about, but in this place, despite none of those issues really being addressed in Bill C-8, we've spent already over 28 hours of debate on Bill C-8. And when you compare that to other bills and other business, that's a lot of time on a particular bill that doesn't seem to be at the center of what Canadians are worried about and what they're thinking about. I don't get a lot of mail on Bill C-8. I get mail on many issues, but not Bill C-8. And so I do think there is a legitimate question as to why it is that certain opposition parties are spending that much time on that particular bill and that we can't seem to find a way to move it along. Even those who don't particularly like it, I think would say, I would certainly say that the issue is that it just doesn't have the right solutions for the problems, but it's not that any of those solutions are particularly offensive. And it's true, time allocation is a tool that can be used, has been used. Many parties in this place have supported time allocation at one time or another. But the fact of the matter is, and I think what this motion speaks to, and I think people have said, well, why are we talking about extended sittings in May as opposed to June, as is the custom? Well, part of that is because we don't have a majority government that can just use time allocation on its own. What you have is them having to work with an opposition party that has said, look, if other opposition parties want more time to debate things, we endorse that. So let's create more opportunities to speak to bills while recognizing that we still have an obligation to pass bills in this place, or at the very least, to vote on them. Maybe they won't pass. But that's a decision we can only find out the answer to, or a question we can, literally calling the question, we can only get the answer to the question if members in this place allow us to proceed to the vote. And so, yes, we're supporting a motion that involves more midnight sittings than ever. It also has a mechanism where we don't necessarily have to sit till midnight, partly to try and introduce some discretion, to recognize that we normally only go till midnight in June. But because we don't have a majority government that's just going to time allocate, we're going to try and create more time for debate in the hopes that opposition politicians who say they want more time to debate government bills are being sincere and that that's a desire that could be satisfied. If we know in advance that desire can't be satisfied because opposition parties are committed in principle simply to talking out bills, creating dysfunction so that they can accuse the government of being incompetent when it comes to its legislative agenda, and there may be some independent reasons for making that accusation that I'm very sympathetic with, but it conflates the issue when you see opposition parties systematically trying to obstruct government business, and it gets harder to tell where the blame lies. And so here, we are trying to propose a path forward that allows for more opportunity for debate and discussion, exactly in the spirit of taking other opposition members at their word in saying that what they want is more time to debate these things. But we need to get to some decisions. And the situation of teachers in respect of C-8 is an excellent example as to why this place can't just talk and talk and talk and talk, but that we do need to decide matters, because there are teachers who have filed their tax returns and are being told that the reason those tax returns aren't being processed is because there's a pending change to their tax entitlements in Bill C-8, a bill that the CRA expected would have been decided upon one way or the other well in advance of the tax year, because C-8 is the bill to implement the announcements that came in the fall economic statement some time ago. That's implied by the name. And so here we are. We haven't begun debate on the Budget Implementation Act. That's the budget that was tabled about 4 weeks ago, because we've done over 28 hours of debate on the act to implement the fall economic statement. We've got teachers that are waiting on the CRA that's waiting on this place to make a decision so that they know actually what teachers are entitled to, because if C-8 passes, then those teachers that have spent money to buy supplies for the children in their class will get more back on their taxes than they otherwise would, and we need to reach a decision. So this actually is a motion unlike other motions we've seen for June, when we've had majority governments that have unilaterally extended midnight sittings in June only and otherwise used the hammer of time allocation on its own. So there is an attempt at compromise here. I think it would be more helpful to get some good faith input from opposition parties about how we find that right balance between advancing government business and doing the proper job of an opposition party. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, what we know is that in particular when it comes to bills like Bill C-8, the Conservative Party, they want to talk a lot. They have a lot to say. Hear, and they're clapping. So my question to the member is, can he possibly understand why the Conservative Party would be against this when this just gives them even more opportunity to speak to very important pieces of legislation? Would he not think, given the amount of speeches that they've given and the interest and passion that they have in debating in this place, that they would not welcome this opportunity to debate even longer with open arms?
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, one of the things that really impressed me when I had the opportunity to tour the Scottish Parliament was that they said, you can speak any language that you want in the Scottish Parliament. It doesn't have to be a language of Scotland. You can speak any language from anywhere in the world in the Parliament of Scotland. And part of the reason why they're able to do that is because they decide, as a Parliament, months in advance, what bill they're going to be debating on what day. They get together, the parties talk about how many people from their respective caucuses want to address a bill, and then they develop a schedule that allows members to speak to the things they want to speak to and allows for decisions to happen. We are so far away from a culture where you could sit down in good faith between parties that disagree on things and come up with a professional way of doing business on the floor of the House of Commons, that we're going to continue to be in these kind of debates again and again and again. And what we need to see is a little more goodwill, I think, on all sides so that we can develop an appropriate and professional culture of decision-making in this place.
Commentaire, the Honourable Member for Kildone and St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Winnipeg for his speech. He's an excellent public speaker. However, I have a number of concerns with Motion 11. First and foremost, this is a scandal-prone government. We've seen the We Charity scandal, SNC, Aga Khan's Island that's re-emerged. We've also seen a government that avoids accountability. In the 2.5 years I've been elected, they've prorogued Parliament, and then a year later they called a snap election. So my major concern with Motion 11 is the part that allows the provision for a minister to move adjournment of the House until September without notice at any time. In essence, they can shut down Parliament anytime there's any reason they think that they should, to avoid a scandal or there's another ethical lapse from the Prime Minister. I would ask my honourable colleague if he's at all concerned that in voting in favour of Motion 11, he's providing the government this kind of power to avoid accountability, which he said his job, opposition has a job to do to hold the government accountable. Is he not concerned he's giving away that power?
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, I think the member will know that that particular provision allows a minister to call for a vote to have an adjournment, and we're in a minority parliament, and that allows every member to weigh in on whether or not the House ought to adjourn. So I think that the fact that it's to precipitate a vote, I mean, we do this at committee. Sometimes people call for adjournment of a committee. We proceed immediately to a vote on whether or not that will happen. Certainly in a minority context on committee, I've seen proposals by the government to adjourn refused by the opposition parties together, and I can imagine that happening in an instance where the government makes an egregious move to adjourn Parliament early, and that's why the vote is a really important component of the motion.
Une brève réponse à question.
A brief question, the Honourable Member for Repentigny. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the question will be brief and it'll be rather a comment. The NDP sold its soul. It sold it last June by reaching an agreement with the Liberals to ensure that the net zero law be as neutral as possible. And then they just resold their soul so that there is the least amount of democracy possible.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona has 1 minute to respond.
I remember a situation in December where the Bloc Québécois decided to support a bill, C2, and to move it forward to the committee. Even faster, because they negotiated this with the government. We could have said that they sold their soul, but we understood that even if we weren't in agreement with their position on C2, that they were negotiating for things that they thought were important, and we have done the same thing. We have negotiated to ensure our priorities. We weren't able to get the government to adopt all our priorities. It was a negotiation, and we wanted to do something. So I don't know why they have to say sold their soul. I don't know how that adds anything. The Bloc is prepared to do the same thing when it can.